My name is Caroline Staten with Transition US, and thank you so much for joining our online event today. Our principal aim is to provide practical support to leaders of transition initiatives, to those who are mulling over starting an initiative in their community, and to community leaders everywhere that are working on resilience building efforts within their locales. We would like to continue to offer the webinars at no cost, but do ask that you consider making a donation. We have a donation button on our website at transitionus.org. And thank you so much to those of you who are able to do that. Without further ado, I'm wanting to give you just a brief synopsis of the teleseminar that you're joining today. It's Financial System and Local Investing. And how can the stock market reach new record highs when the economy is still sputtering and the middle class is fading away? And what role do our investments play in shaping our world? We will look at the financial capital that has been transformed from a tool fostering economic growth to a self-perpetuating tool growing through trading activities progressively divorced from productive economic activities. We'll talk about the importance of divesting from the old economy and the emergence of 4 powerful trends that will transform the world of investing. And we'll look at ways communities at the forefront of this transformation are democratizing and relocalizing investments and building a world that is more equitable and sustainable. And our guest today presenting this information to us is Marco Vangelisti. And Marco came to the U.S. from Italy as a Fulbright scholar in mathematics and economics at the University of California, Berkeley. And after a stint in the financial industry, Marco worked as a visual artist on a full-time basis for 5 years and obtained an MFA focusing on the intersection between public art and ecology. He later worked for 6 years at Grantham, Mayo, Van Otterloo and Company, managing investment equity portfolios primarily on behalf of large foundations and endowments. And then in April 2009, Marco left the finance industry and has since been instrumental in the formation and development of Slow Money Northern California chapter, where he currently leads the investor working group. And Marco is currently developing essential knowledge for transition. It's a whole curriculum for engaged citizens to understand the money and banking system, the economic system, and the financial system and how we need to transform them. So Marco is also helping communities increase their capacity for local investing. So that's who we've got today with us. Marco Vangelisti. He'll tell us more about his website, ways to reach him on Facebook, his upcoming courses, and all that good stuff. So we're thrilled and delighted to have you with us today, Marco. Thank you for joining us, and over to you.
No, thank you, Caroline, for the great introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great, excellent. Well, I'm particularly thrilled to present this material for you because I spent the last 2 years really developing it for the movement. I attended a training, in fact, with Caroline 2 years ago, almost to the day, in Santa Rosa. And I realized that the movement could benefit from a deeper understanding of how the economic system worked, because obviously Transition Time responds to the challenges of global warming, peak oil, and economic instability. And there's a very good understanding within the movement of the science behind the first 2 of those problems. And I felt that I could contribute something in terms of the understanding of the economic system. As I was developing that content, I realized that we also need to understand how the money and banking system works, because that's what, at the end of the day, caused the economic slump we are still dealing with, and how capital and investments in the financial systems work. So we are going to tackle the financial system first. The next talk will be on money and banking, although I'll give you just a teaser during this presentation. And finally, in April, we are going to talk about the economic system. So I have a lot of material. I hope all of you have the presentation. And the content is basically, I will give you a very big picture view. I mean, probably the biggest you can think of. And then I will tell you my personal story in terms of my transition from conventional finance to what I call regenerative finance, more specifically slow money. And then I will hopefully get across the concept that business as usual investing is no longer an option. We really need to wake up to the fact that our investments have impact, whether they're called impact investing or not. And sometimes the impact is not what we are working towards. I will also mention 4 new trends reshaping investing. There's actually Amy Pearl with Springboard Innovation has come up with this way of looking at the 4 trends that will be transforming the future of investing. And then finally what you can do about it, because we want to take actions. So I'll start on slide number 3. Obviously this, which is planet Earth, is the biggest system we are dealing with, and actually that we can modify and change, which we have, unfortunately, in the very reductive way in which PowerPoint works. That's transformed into this big green blob that I would call the biosphere or the ecosystem, if you want. And Homo sapiens, right, there's a species operating there. Sapiens is interesting because it means the one who knows. So we're calling ourselves, the wise ones. And we've created a number of systems ourselves. And I want to indicate maybe the largest one and most comprehensive and inclusive as the social system. What do I mean by that? It basically, on slide 7, it's made up of the rules and things that we and practices and activities that we deal with: science, politics, religion, culture, economy, law, education, and so on. And to a certain extent, we want these subsystems to be in a kind of dialectic relationship with each other, not hierarchical, right? So we don't want religion to run politics, or we don't want economy to become a religion, or politics driving science. But at the end of the day, if you look on slide 8, what I'm suggesting here is that we are looking at a set of nested systems where there is a hierarchy. The biosphere and the ecosystem at the end of the day provides the boundaries and the limits within which our society must operate. And the social system that we built has part of it, a subsystem, which is the economic system. And again, I would argue that the operations and functioning of the economic system should really be dictated by society as a whole. And the society as a whole should really set the boundaries for whatever economic activity we engage in. Now, the economic system on page 9, and again, I realize this is very abstract, but I want just to give you a sense for what may be actually obvious, but we are not quite doing it yet. So the economic system has other subcomponents: manufacturing, labor, means of production, distribution, food production, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm thinking the financial system is actually what helps the economic system operate. So the financial system includes both investments. They're usually intended to expand productive capacity of the economy, and the money and banking system, which allows for the mediation of economic transactions and the selling and buying of goods and services. So here we are. I think we have on page 10 this idea that there is a system hierarchy between these nested systems like Russian dolls. And if we think about the financial system, really the reason to exist is to facilitate economic transactions and to help the economy grow, potentially. It turns out that if you look at page 11, we have violated the hierarchy of those systems. For example, and here the color coding is the green is the ecosystem, and the yellow is the economy, the society, and the orange is the economy. The industrial growth model that assumes that we can grow the economy forever is obviously in violation of the limits imposed by the biosphere. The fact that corporations now have personhood rights is a violation of the fact that the economy should really be at the service of society, not the other way around. I don't want to go through all of them because we have very little time, but I also want to point out on page 12 that we have some attempt at recognizing the importance of that hierarchical structure. So the triple bottom line idea is that, yes, you pursue profit, but you also take care of the people and the planet, right? So it's a recognition that the economic activity has to operate in a way that does not damage society or the environment as a whole. And let's say slow money at the bottom is the idea that capital, financial capital, should be deployed with the ultimate goal of restoring the fertility of the soil. That is recognizing, the hierarchical nature of the systems. And finally, I want to show you on page 13 a quote from Pope Francis. He sent a letter to the World Economic Forum this last year in Davos, Switzerland, and he said, "I ask you to ensure that humanity is served by wealth and not ruled by it." So this, again, is a recognition that the money, the financing, the investment capital should really be there to serve society as a whole and not be ruled by it. So with that, I know this was really fast, but I want to tell you my personal journey from conventional finance to regenerative investing. And it all started here. Page 15 is the only chart that I will show that has a lot of stuff in it. But basically, this is an efficient frontier, is an iconic concept in conventional finance. And the bottom line is what it rests upon is the assumption that to make investment decisions, all you need to know is what is the return of each investment, what is the risk of each investment, and what is the liquidity. And once you know those three things, you can make an investment decision based on the idea that the higher the return, the better, the lower the risk, the better, and the greater the liquidity, which means your ability to convert that asset into cash, the better. And, after 6 years of theoretical math, when I saw this, I thought, wow, this is the real world. We're getting closer to reality. And it turns out, by the way, this is what I call the narrow lens of finance, because conventional finance looks at everything through that very narrow lens. It turns out, page 16, that the real world looks more like this beautiful tree. And to understand really the tree, you need to understand it as embedded in a very dense network of relationships. It is in relationships with our breathing, right? We breathe oxygen, which is produced by the tree, and the tree breathes CO2, which is what we exhale. And the tree is in relationships with fungi in the ground. It's called the mycorrhizal relationship. It provides habitat for plants and organisms, builds soil by shedding the filaments of its roots, and so on and so forth. And yet, page 17, when finance looks at the tree, it sees only lumber, right? In other words, lumber or the commodity value of that tree is the only thing that you can see when you look at it through the narrow lens of conventional finance. Another way of saying this is that the tree, according to conventional finance, is worth more dead than alive. You cannot see all the other relationships and benefits that the tree provides. And this is basically what allows us, at the end of the day, to transform something that looks like the forest on page 18 in the next slide, right? And when we look at this juxtaposition, we feel pain. We can say, well, what a waste, right? Whatever economic benefit was derived from this operation clearly could not represent the value of this beautiful forest on slide 18. Or you can say, how unjust. To a certain extent, the forest could have been enjoyed by future generations, is necessary for millions of organisms, and yet, the destruction of the forest only accrued some benefits to very few people in this generation, right? And yet, if you think about that, if investors had bought the forest for $10 million and sold the wood, the lumber, for $12 million, they would have gotten a 20% return. If they completed the operation in a year, but here's the catch, if they did that in 6 months, they would have gotten a 40% annualized from that investment. And if they did that in 3 months, they would have gotten an 80% return annualized. In other words, remember what I said, the higher the return, the better. And you can see that there is some haste involved in this operation that led to the picture on page 19. So the next slide, basically this very transformation is what led me to leave the financial industry. As I said, I was, as Caroline mentioned, we were managing a portfolio of investments in emerging markets. The firm I actually worked for is ethically run, professionally run. They're really a great company, and serving mostly foundations and endowments. And I remember one year we had a spectacular performance for the portfolio, and we were kind of quant, so we used a computer system to select which stocks to buy, and layered that with a little bit of fundamental analysis. But I basically looked at what is the best stocks that we were holding that generated such a great return for the investors. And I realized the best stock, one of the best stocks, was a palm oil company in Indonesia that had basically taken down tens of thousands of acres of rainforest and replaced that with a monoculture of palm oil. And part of the reason why they did so well financially was because they were compensated with carbon credits because they were planting trees. So once I realized that, I was talking to the chief investment officer of an environmental foundation that had money with us. We were managing their money, and I said, are you not concerned that the money of your foundation is invested in a company that has just taken down exactly the type of habitat of the orangutan on page 21, which is the goal of your foundation? The foundation was founded to protect this environment and this habitats. And there was a little bit of an awkward moment, as you might imagine, and he said, well, my task, really my job, is to preserve the assets of the foundation in perpetuity. And I thought, interesting, slide 22, that's a luxury that was not afforded to the rainforest that has been there for like 1,000 years. And he said, I need to generate a return to support the operations of the foundation and its programs, which is trying to save the forest. And so at that point I realized, okay, this is a systemic issue. The people involved are well-meaning individuals, with integrity, and yet the system sets up incentive to do something that is crazy. So I left the industry at that point because I couldn't really be part of it. And it is hard to leave a very well-compensated job in the middle of an economic recession, I must admit. And then I started looking at these large systems, and quickly I arrived at the money and banking system. And I want to say something now, which is I'm going to present some material in the next 10 minutes that is a little bit hard to take. And so I want to recognize that. I would like you guys to take a deep breath if that happens, and know that I'm going to take you out of it. But I feel that you actually need to know how things work. So I'm going to give you just a teaser for the money and banking because it has an implication on society, the ecosystem, and also investing. So, but I will expand on this next month at the webinar on money and banking. So here is a really condensed version of what I'm going to tell you next month. Page 23. A lot of people don't understand that all money is created as debt. The exception are the coins in your pocket, but both the paper money we use is issued by the Federal Reserve and backed by U.S. Treasuries, which is national debt. And more than 95% of our money supply is actually electronic money that exists on the books of the banks, and those are created through accounting entries when loans are made. In other words, new electronic money enters the money and banking system when banks, private banks, make loans. It is not money taken from somebody else. It's created ex novo when loans are made. This has a couple of implications. One is that we don't have a stable money supply or permanent money supply because when loans are repaid, the money supply shrinks. The liability of the banks, the electronic money that they created, shrinks when loans are repaid. And the other problem is that the banks decide basically the first use of that money by lending it into specific sectors. So they've lent a lot in the last 10 years into the real estate sector, the mortgages that they issued, therefore inflating and later on deflating a real estate market, which is now being reflated again. And also they lend a lot to financial intermediaries and investors and that created a bubble in the stock market. And that's part of the reason why the stock market is doing so well right now, while the economy is still sputtering. The second point that you need to know is that the biggest flaw with the system is that no one within the system ever creates the money to repay the interest on the debt. In other words, the money that is created corresponds to the principal of the loan that the banks make. But no one ever creates the money to repay the interest. So in other words, that's how the money is kept scarce and why eventually people will have to default. And this is also the reason why governments have increased their borrowing the last 5 years, in part to compensate for the shrinking of the debt of the private sector. So these two ideas combined would also explain why austerity does not work. Because when you're saying, okay, government, you need to cut your expenses and your debt, what you're doing is you're reducing the money supply and shrinking the economy. And we've seen that in Ireland, in Spain, in Greece, and so on. And the other thing that is important to remember is that one of the ways to deal with this need to repay more than the money in circulation is to pretend that the economy can grow forever. Because if the economy is bigger next year, we can borrow more and enough to repay the principal and the interest for which no money was ever created. So the growth imperative is in part the result of this flawed design system in our current money banking system. And finally, the private banking sector has now the monopoly on money creation. If you ask regular folks who creates money, they might say, well, the Federal Reserve or the government creates money, but actually it's not, because if the government could create the money, it wouldn't have no need to borrow it. So the government borrows the money from those to whom it ceded the power to create it, and that's the private banking sector. So, and this, at the end of the day, money is an agreed upon fiction. The numbers that you see at the end of the day, we agree to use them as means of exchange, but they're nothing more than computer numbers that are backed by the assets of the banks, but it's not clear what the value of those assets are. And so I just want to get across the idea that even your financial statements or your, if you have an investment account or a brokerage account and you have some investment with Fidelity or some mutual funds, those numbers are not quite real either. And so if you look at page 24, just to give you a little sense for it, I mean, the GDP last year I think was about 70 trillion worldwide. Trillions are big numbers. But the global financial stocks around the world, so the stock markets and bond markets alone, are $212 trillion, right? So 3 times as much as the global GDP, and this does not include venture capital, private equity, real estate, and so on. And then if you talk about derivatives instruments, there are also financial instruments held mostly by the banks and investment managers. There are in the U.S., and the U.S. banks are $212 trillion of notional value of derivatives, and worldwide has been estimated to be 1,200 trillions. Those numbers are not real. And again, take a deep breath now, because I need to make my point by repeating a little bit what Bill McKibben has shared with us, which is a terrifying carbon math, and link it to the fact that a lot of our investments are not valued properly. So you know the numbers, 2 degrees Celsius, we can raise the temperature globally more than 2 degrees, otherwise higher forms of life are not possible on the planet, and we happen to be quite complex as a form of life. So everybody agreed to this in Copenhagen. I think the 196 countries represented there agreed no more than 2 degrees. Great. Then the next question was, this was asked of the Carbon Tracker, which is a research company, energy research company in London, I believe. And the question was, how many gigatons of carbon can we still put in the atmosphere without breaching that limit? And the answer was 500 gigatons. And then the next question was, okay, how many gigatons of carbon do we have in known reserves of the fossil fuel companies right now that we know of? And that is 2,800 gigatons. In other words, if we really grasp this concept, we would stop doing heavy deep ocean drilling for oil. We would stop the extraction of tar sands because guess what? We cannot burn more than a fifth of what we already have. But here's where I connect that to the virtual quality of values in investing. Page 26 shows you the market capitalization of the largest oil companies in the world as of May of last year. They probably went up because the stock market had a rally last year. But Exxon was worth $409 billion. Chevron, Dutch PetroChina, more than $200 billion. Let me ask you, if we really get to the point where we need to leave in the ground about 80% of their reserves, and they couldn't, sell that, is it possible that they're still worth the same amount? And I would argue they will not. And that if we go ahead and not stop there, then we're not going to be around, so it doesn't really matter what those numbers really mean. And this is actually real. It's not just some crazy guy from Berkeley saying that. Page 27, Bloomberg LP, which is the primary providers of financial information to the financial industry, has launched the first tool to measure unburnable carbon assets, also called stranded carbon. Page 28, a number of foundations now have finally seen the light and said we need to divest from fossil fuels and invest in renewable. There was an article recently on the New York Times. And finally, this is, again, a big breath, please. And it's also, I understand, hard information to take in, but I think we do need to wake up. Natural capital risk was a study done by the UN. The Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity finished a 15-year study in April 2013 trying to measure basically unpriced natural capital. We are using, with our economic activity, something that's provided by nature for free to us. Water and land are kind of natural resources we use, and then we produce waste that need to be processed by our environment. So it's land and air pollution, greenhouse gases, and waste. And so what they did is they quantified in dollar terms the natural capital we use. This is applying basically environmental economics, which is to price some of the externalities and trying to apply classical economics to the whole process. And what they found out, we have a little chart on page 30 just to visualize that. But what they found, page 31, is that the largest region sector, and a region sector is economic activity in a particular sector occurring in a particular region. So for example, coal power generation in Eastern Asia is a region sector. And so what they did is they said, okay, what are the revenues of that sector, and how much unpriced natural capital are they using? And so if you look at, for example, cattle ranching and farming in South America, the natural capital cost, mostly deforestation, soil erosion, water pollution, and so on, is staggering, $312 billion, but no one has to pay for that, and the sector generates about $17 billion in revenues, not profits, revenues. In other words, our hamburger at McDonald's really, if fully priced, would cost $30 or $40. And page 32 is the top 20 high-impact sectors. At the end of the day, if you look at page 33, the top 20 impact region sector used $3.2 trillion of natural capital to generate $2.4 trillion of revenues, and none of them would be profitable if they accounted for the use of natural capital. And overall, if you look at the whole economic activity worldwide, we used $7.3 trillion worth of natural capital in 2009 when the study was conducted. And this is hard to take. This is hard to take because what we're doing effectively is we're treating nature as a business in liquidation, and we're liquidating its capital, its natural capital. And this, in part, is what keeps the economy going and those financial returns positive. So we have this little chart, a little cartoon on page 34. At the end of, in a not too distant future, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. So that's, to a certain extent, what we're doing now, not only with fossil fuel investments, but also investments in very large multinational corporations. So last thing, and then we'll go to the positive side of things. So page 35, you might have been told by your financial advisor that the secret to a safe retirement is to have a well-diversified portfolio invested in stocks, bonds, real estate, and so on, and diversified geographically, and you buy and hold mostly and revise the portfolio every few months. And you're going to be just fine. Well, that's no longer the game that is played now. The game that is played with stuff that is on picture on slide 35, and that is basically the server banks of the New York Stock Exchange. A lot of investment banks that are doing proprietary trading are hosting their own server in the same room and paying a fortune for it, because if you have your server across the street, light takes a fraction of a millisecond to go back and forth, and therefore the guys that have the server in the same room can beat you at high-frequency trading. And in fact, on page 36, this was an article published in the Bloomberg Business Week. There is a group of investors that is funding at the tune of $200 million a second set of fiber optic cables between the New York Stock Exchange and the London Exchange to shave about 5.2 milliseconds in the round trip and get an edge in high-frequency trading, which is really now what's happening. So to just recap, page 37, the financial returns are actually pushing us against the ecological limits because a lot of them are derived by converting unpaid natural capital into financial return. Liquidity and trading frequency are causing instability in our system. I don't know if you remember the flash crash of 1,000 points some time ago. And more than 60% of the trades on the New York Stock Exchange is now high-frequency trading, which is done by computers at the tune of at least 4,000 trades per second. And we still have that issue of the $1,200 trillion in derivatives sitting on the various books of the banks and other investors, and that's a big question mark. So to summarize, page 38 is a really cute little creature. And this guy is a tardigrade. So the tardigrade is this, it's about 1 millimeter long. It's as thick as your thumbnail, if you want. And it's really an amazing, resilient creature. It can live completely dried up with no water for 10 years. And then you add some water, and this guy starts moving again. It also can handle radiation. There are 2,500 times the level that would kill a human, and can just be comfortable in temperatures between minus 50 degrees and about 300. So I'm saying this because if you are a tardigrade, then your investment portfolio is probably perfectly positioned to create conditions in which you'll have a very comfortable retirement. But if you're not, then I think it's time to realize that the investments we have today are creating the world of tomorrow, and we need to align them with the world we want to create. So I have to make a confession. So I left the industry in 2009 when I realized how the financial system worked, and I didn't want to be part of it. And then 3 years later, I was sitting on this cushion, not exactly this, not that fancy, but I was doing a so-called metta practice, which is loving kindness practice. And you imagine sending loving kindness to your friends and family, and then to a larger and larger circle, including at the end all living beings around the world. And at that point, that was 3 years later, it struck me that I was already impacting living beings around the world through my own investments, and that I had to overcome the fear of not being diversified enough or not getting a financial return from my portfolio, and I had to divest from everything. So all stocks, all mutual funds, everything. And now what I'm doing is I'm gradually redeploying that capital, and I don't have much, unfortunately, but whatever I have, I do invest in mostly local businesses, mostly through slow money, with the aim, my personal compass for making investments is on page 40. So I start from biophilia, which is the innate love for everything that is alive, and I'm saying, okay, how can I support the conditions that are conducive to life with my investments? And that's the first criteria. And then I try to establish the relationship with the entity that I'm planning to invest with. Slow Money makes that easy because it brings together investors and entrepreneurs that are doing good things. And then only after the relationship is established, I would have an investment or make an investment or a transaction. So page 41, I found this really cute picture on the web. But this basically relates to the biophilia, right? Our innate desire to protect and support life. And I think we need to invest as if life mattered. So maybe, let's see, I'm going to just jump into the way forward and the alternatives, because I think we've heard enough bad news. But I felt it was important for us to just open our eyes to what's happening out there and what our investments are really doing. So the way forward is really relocalize and democratize investments. In other words, roll up our sleeves and start moving money from the old economy to the new economy. And there are 3 great books that I would recommend on page 42. Inquiries into the Nature of Slow Money, Investing as a Food, Farm, and Fertility Mattered by Woody Tash, which really sparked the movement around the country. Local Dollar, Local Cents by Michael Schuman. How to Shift Your Money from Wall Street to Main Street and Achieve Real Prosperity. And Locavesting by Amy Cortese, the revolution in local investing and how you can profit from it. You can, start a group, start reading it, and then maybe connect to one of the slow money groups or local investing groups around the country. And I just want to mention a little bit about slow money because it's really the one, when I left the financial industry, I thought I would never be involved with finance again. And then when I stumbled upon the work of Woody Tash, I was really inspired. And slow money has a set of principles, and the first one is we must bring money down to earth. So that's the first principle, that we're investing in real places, in people and enterprises close to home, starting with food. And invest patiently with the goal of building healthy enterprises, communities, and ecosystems over the long term, and measuring the success by the world we create around us, not just the financial return. And what is the health of the soil, and not just the profit we make. So slow money is really about fixing our economy from the ground up. I actually participated in this. We made an investment in Kepe Valley Farm. SHOP is basically a program to aggregate about the produce of 41 farms in Kepe Valley and distributed it through a CFA program. Farmers markets are actually quite time-consuming and not that profitable actually for farmers. And so the idea of having a group of people that can aggregate all their produce and do the marketing and the farmers market for them was really very beneficial to the farmers. And finally, there's another interesting model. It's page 46, Slow Money Maine, No Small Potatoes Investment Club. A bunch of people came together, pitched $5,000 into a pool, and they all collectively decide how those dollars will be loaned out to the local food producers. And so that has been a very great learning experience and established great relationships. And some of the people that are part of this investment club eventually went off and did larger investments together in some of the same entrepreneurs. So maybe, let's see, shall we see if there is any burning question out there at this point before I launch into the 4 new trends and the options that are available to participate in local investing?
Yes, let's see if there's any clarifying questions, any burning questions. And I know that this is a lot of very dense information, really great information, and there will be a recording available in about a week. So anyone on the call can listen to it again because I think it takes a few passes. But in the meantime, press 1 on your keypad if you have a clarification that's really going to help you get the rest of the information. So we have Christine Gardner. Go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Hi, I'm so enjoying this conversation. And my burning question is, we're located in Southwest Oregon, really rural Southwest Oregon, and really trying to build up the local economy here, and we're just stymied to wonder how is any capital going to reach this very poor community to nourish initiatives. There's actually a lot of initiatives, but we just feel like the capital isn't. Our community is run by volunteers, and so few have any capital to part with. How do we get that capital down to a very small local level at this time? Thank
Great.
you.
Right.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Marco.
Great. That's a great question. I will deal with that in the course of the presentation, but thank you. This is a very important question, right, because a lot of the capital is in the urban areas. So I will address that in the course of the rest of the presentation. And I want to actually use the little buttons to ask you two questions. So I'm curious to find out about 120 people that are online right now, and these are all anonymous, so you can be candid in your answer. I'm going to ask you a question, and you can press 1, 2, or 3. So I'll give you 3 options on your phone, and then we can see the percentage. So the first question is, if you have investments, either mutual funds or 401k plan that you control, press 1. This could be also SEP IRAs and Roth IRA and so on. If you have pension investments that your pension benefit provider, for example, the employer controls, but you don't control, if you're a teacher, for example, then somebody else controls your pension plan, press 2. And if you have no investments at this point, press 3. So let's take a look at that.
So again, would you just quickly go over what the options were, Marco?
Yeah, the option are if you have investments that you control, and that could be either mutual funds or retirement plans in a 401k or IRA that you can actually direct in one way or the other. If you have pension investments, but no investments that you control, that somebody else is controlling, press 2. And you have no investment at this point, you press 3. Okay, good. So more than half of you, in fact, close to 60%, actually, yeah, it's about 47%, 50% of you have investments, and you can actually control them. So that's great. This is the second question I'm going to ask you. If you have made some local investments besides your own business, if you're a business owner. I know if you're a business owner, you're going to put everything into your business. But if you've invested in somebody else locally, press 1. If you have not made any local investment yet but would like to do so, press 2. And if you're an entrepreneur looking for local investors, press 3.
And then again, just review that, Marco, and we'll...
Right. So 1 is you have made local investments. You press 1. You have not made local investments but would like to, press 2. You're an entrepreneur looking for local investors. Okay, good. So what we got is less than a quarter of you have made local investing. Remember, you had about half of you that had assets that you could control. And about 42% have not made a local investment yet but would like to. And 15% of you are entrepreneurs in need of capital. So that's very helpful. Let me go back to the presentation, and then we'll open up for questions. And thank you for all of those who asked questions at this point. And this actually, as I said, Amy Pearl up in Oregon is doing some very interesting work supporting local communities with creating the conditions to make local investing successful. And I'm collaborating with Amy on this. And she has come up with this idea that there are 4 trends now that are going to revolutionize future investing. And the first one is the social enterprise movement. In other words, a lot of the millennials and young people do not want to work for a large, extractive, profit-maximizing corporation. It just, sucks your soul dry. And so they say, no, we want to do good, either for the economy or for the environment, and we want to use the for-profit model to keep going. And the goal is not to maximize the profit, but to reach profitability to continue to do good work in the community and or in the environment. So those are the social enterprise movement. It's very exciting. The other one is impact investing, although I would argue all investments are impact investments. We might not be aware of what other impacts our investments have besides the financial return, but there are some investors now that are starting to awake to the idea that they want to do something good with their investment, not just get financial returns. So ideally, I would want to see all investments being impact investing in the sense that we really need to pay attention to the non-financial impact of our investment activity. The Jobs Act and crowdfunding would really open up the possibility for local investing, which right now it's really hard because of securities laws. And those are being relaxed a little bit now. There are some crowdfunding platforms that are taking advantage of that. And the local first movement is very powerful. We do that with buy local, eat local, and I think we also need to get to invest local. And so at the end of the day, at the intersection of that, we have a new way of deploying capital that builds sustainable, healthy communities. So I want to basically say, okay, that sounds pretty cool, but what can the person in your seat do? And I hope you're sitting down, because this has been 50 minutes already into the talk. So the first thing, and people don't quite recognize, is that moving your money from the very large banks to a regional or a bank or credit union is the best thing and easiest thing you can do to increase the flow of local investing in your community. This is because the large banks are no longer lending in communities. They don't do small deals. They don't invest in local businesses. In fact, the small banks, regional banks, and credit unions, even though they only hold about 20% of the assets in the United States, they make more than 50% of the local loans. So simply by transferring money from the too big to fail banks to a regional or credit union, you can start improving the conditions in your community. The other way is there are ways to invest that are not the standard investments, but they're still a way of providing capital to entrepreneurs to help them succeed. And joining a local community-supported agriculture is a great way to do that. If you are an eater, you can be an investor. The person, I think it's Christine or Christina, sorry if I didn't catch your name, said we don't have capital here in the rural communities, and that's true, but you still need to eat. And so there is some money set aside for paying for food. And so the idea of joining a CSA is a form of investment. You're giving the money at the beginning of the season to the farmer, and then you get paid in basically the produce of that farm. So that's another way. You can prepay for your favorite food purveyor through a new platform that's been developed within the Slow Money Network called Credibles, and I talked a little bit about that. And you can join your local Slow Money group. There is actually a Slow Money group down in Asheville, I believe, down in southern Oregon, and another one could be started to kind of figure out what to do. If you're trying to decide what to do with your money as you move it out of Wall Street and all the crazy global casino is in right now, you can park some money with RSF Social Investment Fund. This is a fund that lends to agricultural enterprises, educational institutions, and institutions involved in art. And you can actually see exactly who is receiving the money that you have invested in their fund. And the other thing, you can explore currently available platforms. So page 53, this is the Credibles. You can go on credibles.org. If you have a business you like, that is a food business, they can list on Credibles, and you can prepay for your consumption at that place. And so then you'll be eating your credits. That's why it's called Credibles, edible credits. And that's a way to fund. There are a couple of local places here in California that raised $20,000 to $30,000 in prepayments. We're able to get something done. There is also a platform now called Cutting Edge X. Cutting Edge is a consulting company led by Jenny Casson that has done very good work in terms of tapping into alternative sources of capital in the community. And you can find on page 55, there is basically Farm Fresh to You. You can't see it from the slide because it's an animated thing, but there's something in California, a couple of enterprises in California that went through the process of registering with the local state regulatory commission and can offer investments to the public. And then there is this Kiva Zip that is very interesting, where people can come together and a community can become a trustee on KivaZip. In other words, they can vouch for the character and of the entrepreneur looking for money, and they can sponsor basically that person on this platform and raise zero interest loans for a year, and $5,000 is the limit at this point, but after a couple of successful repayment processes, that trustee can make loans for a larger amount, and this is open up to the whole community. So the community can actually invest as little as $5 into a loan and help local entrepreneurs. And there's also on page 57, and then I'll open up for question, there's also a platform to invest in your own city if you're in an urban environment. A lot of the commercial developers invest in projects that have a pretty decent return. And so this platform allows people living in that urban environment to actually participate in some of the commercial projects, real estate projects in their community. So now I'm basically done. I added some material at the end that I might touch upon in the Q&A session, but I want to answer the question that was, again, presented initially, which is a lot of rural communities are really suffering. They do not have capital in their midst, although there is some, but there is not that much. And so how do you deal with that? And this is a really tough problem to deal with. And part of it is, the capital is concentrated in the cities. So some rural communities that are providing food, obviously, to an urban center could try to engage with a slow money group and help the people in the urban environments to invest in food and farming enterprises in their midst. And the other one is really trying to retain as much of the capital that is there, even if it is little, by, again, moving the money from the large, too big to fail banks to a credit union or a regional bank operating in that setting, by maybe funding some entrepreneurs through a KivaZip where everybody in the community can pitch in, $10, $20, and the entrepreneur can get a few thousand to get started, by basically viewing all the money that exists there and trying to retain it as much as possible and increase the multiplier. There are also, of course, other strategies for compensating for the lack of dollars and money, for example, but that can only really work for facilitating economic transactions and, time banks, alternative currencies, and so on. But for investments, really, it's tough, and don't know I have an answer for you, but again, that's the work that Amy Pearl is doing in Oregon, is helping rural communities, retain as much as possible of their capital and invest it locally. So shall we open up for more questions?
Let's do that. So press 1 on your keypad if you have a question, and for some of you, I know you might have only had an hour. This will be recorded. Check our website in about a week's time for the recording. David, we'll start with you. David Camp.
Hi. I'm wondering what the ratio, the relationship between impact ratio and impact investing is, or is there one? And perhaps just a little more edification on how the impact ratio is calculated on slide 32 and 31.
32 and 31. Okay, thank you for pointing me in the right direction. 32 and 31. Oh yeah, so that is what I would suggest is, so basically the natural capital, right? For example, the case of cattle ranching is $300 billion, right? And then
right.
16, 17 is the revenues you get. So basically, if you divide the impact by 16.6, you get basically, the number is too big here for me to see it. Let me go back to it. So you get 18.7. In other words, you need $18.7 of natural capital to generate $1 of revenues. That's how the impact ratio is basically
the
first number.
Some of these numbers don't work, though. So if you look at natural gas power generation on the bottom, it gives a 1.0, and I couldn't figure out how that number relates to the two other numbers that are there.
Right. So I would refer you to the actual study.
Okay.
And let's see. But basically, I see what you mean. Yeah. The impact ratio for the page 32 is because it only looks at one of the externalities. So in other words, here you're only looking at cost measurement. Yeah, so you need to look at the study, and it is on my website. So if you go on ek4t.com, essentialknowledgefortransition.com, and you go into the blog, there is a blog that is titled Investing and the Disappearance of the Sacred, that has a link to the full study. And if you're interested, I would recommend you read it. It's really well done.
Thank you. And is there any relationship between this impact ratio and impact investing, or are they just two different uses of the word impact?
There is not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's go to Vanessa Warheit. Go ahead.
Hi, Marco, can you hear me?
Yes, Vanessa, yes. Good to hear you.
Hi. So my question is about tax sheltering, because my guess is a lot of other people are in a similar situation, which is that most of our investments are in some sort of tax-sheltered investment, which, and I know that you were in contact with some people who were looking at IRA, self-directed IRA advising.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you have any more advice on that, on how, like for those of us, like I really want to do impact investing, but I don't want to lose the tax benefit.
Absolutely. Yes. Very good question. So a lot of our investments are in 401k plans or mutual retirement accounts that are tax advantaged, right? So they either grow tax free until you start withdrawing, or it's after tax money that can accumulate tax free, like the Roth IRAs. So there is a process for basically hiring a custodian that holds your assets, and they can be held with the same tax advantages, but you basically tell them where to invest. In other words, you can do an investment in a farm next door if you want, and basically once you transfer your assets to a self-directed IRA custodian, you can say, here is the title to the note or to whatever it is, and hold it in my tax-exempt account. And so we've done some work in terms of Solana in Northern California. We have some resources. We've done some research on some of the more established self-directed IRA custodians, and I'll be glad to share that information. Just send me an email.
Okay, thank you. Next is David Wimberly.
My question is about how do you switch over to investing in a gift economy. As you can probably guess, I've been reading a lot of Charles Eisenstein. And further, how do these investments provide the resilience in case of severe economic downsizing or even collapse in various forms?
Right. Those are two great questions. At the end of the day, if we as a humanity manage to make the great turning, we might actually be operating more in a gift exchange economy where we're doing things for each other without needing to be paid for it or exchange money. And I would argue that the amount of volunteering that is going on right now, it's part of that gift exchange economy. I spend about 20 hours a week volunteering for slow money, and nobody pays me for that. And there are tremendous amount of volunteer energy around the country. There isn't really an investment besides the investment of time. In other words, the way you invest in the gift exchange economy is with your time. And as you do things for others, you create the goodwill that is necessary to get something back when you are in need. So that's the way to invest in the gift exchange economy. For your second question, as I will explain more next month about the money and banking system, we could see a collapse in the money and banking system that could be really very damaging to the economy, similarly to what happened in 2007. And at the end of the day, the investments that are made locally to your local business, your local farmer, are not subject to price volatility, to high-frequency trading, to collapse in the stock market, whatever it is. It's just you're investing in real people and real places. You still have, if the business is still around and people buy food from them or their products, then eventually they'll repay your investment. And so I would say building for resilience is, local investing is key for resilience in investing and to build resilience in the community.
Thank you, Marco. We're going on to Erica Charlesworth. Go ahead.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. I'm so enjoying this call and information from everyone. Thank you. So I have two questions. One is, do you see eventually that our investments would really go to either a zero return or a negative return, in order to really, through this process, this great turning that you're talking about, when we really see that happening, that's really what we would begin to see is less and less return on investment, even going to zero or negative return?
That is an excellent question. And I'm writing an article on the fact that the financial assets have grown way more rapidly than our GDP. And, just think about what I said, right? The stock market and bond markets around the world were worth last year $212 trillion. All that capital expects a financial return. And, some people expect, 8% for the stock market and 5 or 6 for the bond market. Let's imagine it's just 5. What we're talking about is $10 trillion of financial return has to come at the end of the day from the global economy, which is $70 trillion. In other words, more than 10% of the GDP worldwide would have to be devoted to pay the interest or the return of this financial assets. And if you look about real estate and venture capital and all the other things, so I think eventually we'll wake up to the fact that we're not going to have returns. That a lot of the returns are probably going to be negative. I mean, in the case of the oil companies, for example, the return we're talking about is probably minus 80%. If we wake up and actually locked 80% of their assets and say you can't sell this or you can not extract them or burn them, we're going to be losing at least 80% of the market capitalization. And that's the point I was making. And so I would say if people say it's risky to invest locally, the returns are very low, I would say it's much better than a very large negative return, which is what we might eventually see in the highly intermediated financial markets around the world.
Oh, thank you. Scott Ragsdale, go ahead. Scott?
Everyone can hear me, right?
Yes, now we can.
Okay. Wonderful discussion, Marco. Very much appreciate you taking the time to edify everyone who's listening. Here in Davis, California, I'm looking forward to participating in a number of micro investments and things like that in the near future. And I'm just wondering from a little bit broader perspective, considering our political dialogue is pretty much ensconced in our current notions of productivity and the measures of employment, how do you frame this positively to allow people to make that transition to a more sensible investment strategy?
Well, part is employment, right? I mean, you're saying if you invest locally, you're supporting and creating local jobs. So the question is, do you want to invest to create jobs in China, or do you want to invest to create job and opportunities and a higher multiplier, right, effect in your community? So I would say, the argument for local investing is so strong. I mean, it just requires a little bit more effort, right? Because it's not, a nice diversified mutual fund where you can, toss in some money and somebody else will deal with the investing and then just give you a financial return. what I'm saying is that we have to wake up to the fact that that financial return may not be there. And it does require a little bit more work, because when you do local investing, you need to understand the business, you need to maybe support the entrepreneur, get to know the entrepreneur, and so on. But I would say at the end of the day, I feel is less risky overall, especially on a macro level, because the current investment system is very extractive and very damaging to our chances of long-term survival. So. Yep.
Right. And the quick follow-up to that is traditional investment institutions clearly are not quite aware of this yet, and will probably take a different opinion. What do you anticipate in terms of what that kind of campaign might look like?
Well, the reason why I wanted to start with this topic is because you can do something about it. You can move your money to a smaller bank. You can decide to divest from a mutual fund and start investing locally. I mean, this is, if we're saying, the system needs to change and politicians need to do this, or the large CEOs have to wake up and, be behaving in a different way. I mean, it's really hard to imagine that happening. But when we're talking about local investing and buying locally and prepaying from local food providers or other entrepreneurs, that's something we can do. It takes some work, but it's possible. So the large institutions, I see now some foundations finally to wake up. For example, waking up and say, why do we have our assets invested in a way that could be contrary to our mission, and then use 5% of those assets to try to achieve mission? Right? I mean, why do we do that? And most of the people don't even measure the impact of their regular investments. But for example, the list of foundations that decided to divest from fossil fuel are finally realizing, we really need to reconnect our mission with the way we invest our funds.
I think, Marco, we have time for one more question, unless you want to stay on a little longer. But we'll take Janet McFarland. Go ahead.
Hi. I'm really enjoying the presentation. You're really clear. I don't have any money to invest. I have some money in a pension fund, which I have no control over as far as I know. And yet I have control over how I spend my money. And one of the things that I'm sort of stuck with, it seems like, is Comcast. And how do I get Wi-Fi? Are we going to have a local Wi-Fi server here? I know they're doing that in some of the outlying areas. Or do you have any other thoughts about that?
Sure, yes. So first of all, I just want to say that even though you don't control your pension plan, you can actually let your voice be heard. So just to give an example, remember the Sandy Hill massacre, I think it was December of 2012, right? What happened is that the manufacturer of the semi-automatic weapon that was used was part of the Freedom Group that was owned by Cerberus Corporation. There was a private equity firm that had about $700 million from the CalSTRS, the pension fund for the teachers in California. So the California teachers had their funds invested in about $700 million of them in the Cerberus Corporation that was holding the Bushmasters, part of the Freedom Group, and the Bushmaster produced the semi-automatic weapon that killed all those school kids. And so basically the teacher said, you know what, we are very uncomfortable about our investments being, our pension being invested in a company that has produces weapons that are illegal in California, for example. They're legal in the rest of the country. And so the manager of the plan called the Cerberus Corporation and said, you know what, we're thinking about divesting from you guys and yanking $700 million out of you because we cannot support the type of investments you make. And within a day, the Cerberus Corporation liquidated all the Freedom Industries, including the Bushmasters, and were kicked out. So in other words, even though you don't control, you can have your voice be heard. In terms of, sorry, your second question was?
Marco, I can't remember who the person was now.
Oh yeah. The local wireless, right. So the idea is that some activities need to be done by large corporations. That's true. And so we want to put some pressure on them to maybe convert into benefits corporation or not focus solely on profits and maximization. But there are a number of towns now that, for example, are providing wireless services to their community as a social benefit. In other words, there are some municipalities that are actually providing that to all the citizens for free. Gad Alperovitz has a couple of examples in his latest book, What Then Must We Do, about some of these local activities that are supporting businesses in the local community.
Marco, we are at our time. We usually run these for 75 minutes. There's 8 other people with their hands up. Would you like to spend a few more minutes?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I can be around. I'd be glad to stay until all
we'll roll for another 5 minutes and check in again. So let's go to Mark Summer. Go ahead.
Hi. Thank you very much for this presentation. I agree with others. It's very clear. It seems to me in part that when we start to look at returns in a more conscious way, we move away from the notion of maximizing. I think this is a society that's obsessed with maximizing, whatever it be, money, fame, power, and that is at the root, it's one of the roots of what goes wrong. So when you think about optimizing, perhaps we should be thinking about balancing many values, not just money, but connection to community, connection to the land, connection to future generations. Is that another way of thinking about this as an optimizing society, an optimizing culture?
Well, you're basically hitting the nail right on the head. We humans are not good at thinking in systems. And if you've done any system theory research and study, you know that every time you maximize for a particular variable, you're going to endanger the well-functioning of a system. And so that's what we've been doing. We're like very simple creatures that we think of ourselves as isolated from the rest of the world and plants and animals and ecosystems on which we depend. We're thinking on maximizing something that is easily measurable, like money, how much money you have, right? And in the process, we might work way too many hours and have troubles with our family because we don't see them anymore, right? Every time you just pick a particular variable and try to maximize that, you are creating problems within a systemic setting. And so you're perfectly right. We need to, when we invest or when we have an economic activity, we cannot think about maximizing profits as the only variable, because if you do that, then you're going to maximize also externalities and the costs that you do not bear and somebody else has to bear. And so how do we switch to that way of thinking, which is systemic and looks at all the various dimensions as a way of optimizing? If you want, we need to optimize for many variables, not just one. And you're right. So that's why I'm taking a system approach when I present my material.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marco. Leslie Krenna, go ahead.
Hi, this is Leslie. I am actually also from Davis, California, so I'm curious if it's possible to get the name of the gentleman from Davis as well. I have a few questions. One was just to talk a little bit more about what a DPO is, because it wasn't absolutely clear to me there. And also, if the Slow Money organization has branched out to any endeavors that are not food focused.
Right. Yeah, so the first one is the reason why it's very hard to do local investing is because we have securities laws both at the national level and at the state level. When Facebook, for example, went public and sold its stock to the public, it had to register with the SEC at the national level, and with each of the 50 states securities offices to offer the security in each state. That is something that can cost, upward to, $1 million in legal fees or more. So there are some exemptions from the registration at the national level, and one of them is the intra-state exemption. The SEC says if your business is in one state, you're planning to sell primarily in that state, and to only solicit investors in that state, then you don't need to register with us. We can give you an intra-state exemption, which means you just register with the state authorities. A DPO, a direct public offering, is an offering that has been registered with the state, and it's counting on a particular exemption from the full national registration with the SEC. So a DPO is a way of registering your security at the state level or at any state in which you're planning to offer your security, and it's usually much less costly to go through. But after you do that, you can actually do public and general solicitation. You can actually do advertising. You can talk about your investment, which you couldn't really do unless you go through the process of registering your security. And this is a little bit technical. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get into it. But if there is interest, maybe we'll do a different webinar on the legal aspects and the platforms and the evolution in the crowdfunding and local investing space.
Good. And then the slow money question too.
Slow money, slow money starts with food, and there is first of all, it's all volunteer driven, and we figured. We understand food. Everybody relates to food, and it's easier for us if we make local investing to understand whether a food entrepreneur or business is viable. So slow money per se is not about doing, renewable energy investments and so on. But having said that, once people come together and form a slow money group or an investment club or an investment group, then they can decide to, start looking at other type of investments if they have the expertise. What I found personally is that, it's easier for me to understand a farm or a food business and know whether it makes sense to invest in it than even a solar installation company. I don't know what the issues are, what the problems are with the production of panels in China and the cost of that fluctuating that has taken out a lot of local solar businesses. So slow money is really focused on food and farming.
Thank you. And I think this will need to be our last question. There's still some of you with your hands up. I apologize for not being able to get to all of you. Marco, please do, as soon as we hear from Miles, who will be next, remind people of your website. You do blogs. And any other information so that people can continue to learn. So Miles, go ahead.
Hi, Marco. My name is Miles. I own a business in the San Francisco Bay Area named Albany Arts Gallery. We're really focused on promoting local producers and manufacturers through a holistic permaculture lens. And I'm really interested in how I can help my community establish monetary sovereignty. I have a specific question on your thoughts on how we can use the Bitcoin platform or other blockchain cryptocurrencies to help small communities build their local economy. It seems like a particularly powerful tool to track exchanges within time banks, barter banks, other social capital, tool lending libraries, and micro community banks. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so the Bitcoin, everybody is talking about Bitcoin now because it went from being worth a few cents per Bitcoin about a couple of years ago, and in June of last year it was about $100 per Bitcoin, and it went up to I think more than 1,000. So a lot of people kind of love the idea of, my goodness, Bitcoins, I put some money there and it's going to multiply by 10 in 6 months. To me, that is not a very successful currency per se because of the very wild fluctuation and the fact that it can be manipulated very easily. As you probably know, it's created, it's basically a crypto commodity that can only be 21 million at the end of the day. You can't produce more than 21 million Bitcoins. Right now it's about, I think, more than 10 million or 12 million, something like that. And it can, the transaction can be anonymous, which means that some people can use it to make transactions that are illegal in their jurisdiction. And so there is a certain attractiveness to that. You can also make legal, of course, transactions. You can donate to, nonprofits, buy software and things like that. I don't think that is a very good currency to base local activity on because of how easily manipulated its value is. I wouldn't be surprised if the big boys in Wall Street are using, $1 billion of spare change to manipulate the price of Bitcoin up and down and milking it for all it's worth. I would rely more on designing a local currency in an appropriate way, and I would recommend a book by Tom Greco, The End of Money and the Future of Civilization, that has a good explanation of what are the design features of a successful local currency.
Thank you, Marco, for everything, for all of this information. Again, there will be a recording on our website in about a week. You can look for it in the online training archives. We'll have it there, and we'll also have it in our newsletter. We encourage you to join our newsletter, keep abreast of all this good material and future teleseminars, etc. And Marco, I wanted to give you your closing thoughts, and then what I'll do is I'll unmute everyone, and on your way out you can give a shout out to Marco with your thanks and maybe let him know where your locale is. So closing thoughts, Marco?
Yes, that basically if you're passionate about a particular issue, make sure that your investments are not working against you. And it might take a little bit of looking into it, but I think it's important that we align our investments with the things we're trying to make happen on the ground and in society. And finally, I would encourage you to go to my website if you have a curiosity to learn more, and I have a lot of resources up there. Is ek4t.com, so essential knowledge for transition number 4.com, and you have the contact information in the slides. If you have a question that did not get answered, feel free to reach out to me. I think you have the in your slide a way to contact me. So please do so, and I'll be glad to get back to you. Thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you once again, Marco. So the next one is March 19th. That's sort of the second installment, Money and Banking System, and then April 23rd on the economic system, both with Marco coming up.